So, my name is Justin Corey. I've been working at Survios for about 4 years as a lead artist. I joined the company in 2014, worked on raw data, and then once we wrapped that up, moved to this awesome music experience called Electronauts. So, Electronauts is not a game, it's not a tool, it's an experience. It's a music creation experience. And it's one of those things that you can't quite put your finger on it, what you're going to do with it, because it's just, the art is driven by the engineering. And, okay, quick shout out to Raw Data. First VR game to generate 1 million in less than a month, and the first VR exclusive game to top #1 on Steam's global sales charts. And we just released Sprint Vector recently, where we patented the fluid locomotion technology, and again, top #1 on Steam and Oculus. So let's talk about the visual language of Electronauts. So what you'll see here is our Electronaut. He's pretty funky, he's pretty awesome, he's an astronaut who plays music. And let's go over the story. Electro-universal. In the future, humanity harnesses the power of the harmonic wavelength known as the electroharmonic grid. While rippling through the depths of the universe, a great disruption in the harmonic fields causes the Electronauts to become separated, lost in 4 different quadrants of space: cosmic, technology, alien, and psychic. You must groove through each zone and use your melodic resonance spheres to make the universe dance and unite. It's time to get the band back together. And okay, first term, one of these terms was used often when describing Electronauts and something that we adhered to, which is synesthesia. It's a perceptual phenomenon in which the stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to automatic involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway. Best way to describe this is you hear music, you dance. It's one of these things that you just can't control. And yeah, it plays a big part in the game here. And when I first heard this term, it was by a man named Tetsuya Mizuguchi. And if you guys work in games and you don't know his name, for shame. She's been around for quite a while. Worked at Sega, responsible for the Sega Rally series, Rez, and Space Channel 5. So he says, the majority of music games fall into the category of rhythm-based or time-based, Mizuguchi says. That's not where my interest is. Rather, it's more about how the layering of music with visuals changes the world that you're in, and that becomes an experience in and of itself. So very cool. It's not just about the game. He's more interested in just getting your attention. So let's talk about the music reality engine. This is something that Survios developed. It's our core technology for Electronauts. Okay, so you might say, what is the music reality engine? It's essentially a technology that allows a person to be a performer, even if they are not the most musically inclined. It's a beautiful piece of technology because for me, I've tried to play instruments all my life and never fully succeeded. And then, the minute I touch this game or this experience, it just changes everything and you can have fun with it, you get lost in it forever. So moving on to our inspirations, and again, Tetsuya Mizuguchi. Space Channel 5 was, again, one of the first games that we discussed when we talked about kind of the fun nature and the language of the game. It's one of those things that as you play it, the experience grows, the environment moves more, the colors shift more. It really rewards you for performing well, and it's just something that we kind of inherently built into the Electronauts game. EDM, also a very big influence on our game. The colors, the strobing patterns, the embodiment of nature and science and math, lots of geometric shapes, lots of movement. You'll see these heavily used in our visualizers. Space, another big inspiration, especially in terms of color palette. You'll see a lot of these nebulas share very similar and almost cosmic-like colors that inherently just kind of happen to be included in our game. And yeah, it's just such a beautiful thing to look at, and really just, again, you'll see it everywhere when you're just careening through the space. So let's move on to the Prodigy 1. Prodigy 1 is essentially the hub. It's the place where you start any song that you're about to play. It's essentially a radio station in space. You're broadcasting yourself out, and you see this tunnel, you get launched through it every time you go to your next track. So this concept was originally done by Brian Higgins. Great guy, very, very awesome and talented person. So when I joined the company, or I mean the project more like it, there wasn't really a very clear direction in terms of where things were going to go. We were going very hard sci-fi, and while it's cool, didn't exactly reflect the kind of experience we wanted to bring. So really, without trying to shake up things too much or change things too much, I kind of tried to make a few quick adjustments to the visual style of the game. And it's really just about bringing the color palette to something that matched the mood. So we kind of moved into this direction, incorporating more music into the environment, turning the look of the sci-fi to something that you'd find more in audio equipment. So looking at the materials that you'd find in audio equipment was like a big inspiration for the kinds of shapes that we would use for the environment. You can see at the bottom right corner, that is your launch tunnel. And we wanted to decorate it to look like a stage, like if you were performing at a concert. For me, I think that was the biggest selling point, is like as people are about to go off into these zones, you want them to feel like they're about to enter a stage. So that was a big, big selling point for me. And these are the concepts again. These are a combination of some of the modeling blockouts that I did in conjunction with paintovers that Brian did. So here is the in-game shot of a very epic sequence where you're flying from space, you enter into this ship through a large tunnel, and then you land into this hangar, which is there where you'll launch out to your next song. So this is the Prodigy 1 interior in real time. And here's our launch tunnel in real time. This environment was very, very intimidating to build. The scale of it is just absolutely massive. When you see a character inside of this environment in relation to everything else, it's dwarfing. And the trick is to find the right balance of scale and the balance of detail, and also get it done on time, which was not much time to do. But you'll see we've got a lot of the colors that the nebula is represented, all represented here. Very unified, and when you're in there, everything's just bumping, music's going, speakers are moving, lights are strobing. It's very, very awesome. So here's the Prodigy 1 exterior. So remember when I told you we fly into this ship? Well, this is the ship that you fly into. Again, another awesome concept by Brian Higgins. So my goal here was to try and recreate this as best as possible, but also making it performant. Not the easiest task. So let's look at the literal translation of this into 3D. So here's my take on it. This is where we move away from concept and we start getting some details in there. And this is the polished piece that is now the Prodigy 1. The rail gun on the front is kind of like a really powerful image to look at because it just makes you feel, you're just getting shot straight out of there. It's very clear, it's very direct, it's just incredibly interesting shapes. And again, attaching speakers to everything was just a big motif. Wanted to beat you in the head with it. Here's a back shot. So, one of my difficulties, yes, I'll get concept, but then I don't necessarily know exactly all the details that need to go into it, right? So, again, trying to look at references of audio equipment, just general turntables, everything that I could get my hands on, I started incorporating that into this ship. Get a little closer here. Again, in this sheer scale of these things, the biggest trick is balancing the small details to the large details. And you'll see here to your right is the back end of the ship, which needed to get probably the majority of the love because that's what you see the most. And I'm very happy with the end result, and I think ultimately it really served its purpose. And once you fly into that back end, it's pretty epic. So moving on, then we have the Wave Rider. The Wave Rider is, again, this is what you're always flying through or flying inside of as you're going through your visualizers. It's a very fun-looking ship. Originally, I wanted it to be like a Cadillac, like a space Cadillac, because it's kind of like this motif that I've always thought about for quite a while, especially when this game popped up. But ultimately, we kind of settled on something that was a bit more unified for the look of the entire environment. But yeah, still very cool. Got equalizers, speakers everywhere. I think the idea is that everything is propelled forward by sound, audio waves. And then here's shots of the Wave Rider in game. Pretty good translation. Not exactly ideal or identical, but still very happy with the look of it. But yeah, it's a very cool place to be on in the inside as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a shot of the actual interior of that, but you'll hopefully get a chance to go down and play it today because it's on the show floor. Okay, so let's talk about our Electronaut. So we had a wonderful character concept artist named Keegan. He came on board middle of the project and was really just spending a lot of time just kind of fleshing out the design, trying to take it a little more fun direction than just straight sci-fi and astronaut. And ultimately, we ended up moving into this direction. Very, very colorful, very vibrant, matches the environment, matches the ships. Just very fun and wacky. This character model was done by Damon Woods. He's our lead character artist at the company. He's a busy man. He does a lot of character work for us. And then here's a look at some of our visualizers that we designed. These were done by Gabriel Valdivia. Gabe is also a tech artist at the company and very talented guy, very creative guy. I really enjoyed the inspirations that he put into this game. And also you can see in this image is a couple examples of our instruments. The spheres you see in front of you are the harmonic spheres. These are the initial instruments that you use to generate your audio. Very, very intuitive, very simple, and very fun. Disco balls were a big inspiration for these guys because initially the visual look of the game was not dictated by the art direction, but more by the technology, right? And what the designers put in. So it was all very, very prototype, but once you started using it, you didn't want to change it. You didn't want the art to then take over the experience. So we had to kind of accommodate those things. The things below you are your decks. You'll see these nice hovering, or these nice holographic patterns coming from the bottom. And these cubes that are inserted into each one are your different instruments and your different ways to interface with the whole experience. On our left, we have our backtracks, which you can queue up and set up. And then we also have filter cubes to the right of that, those gray cubes. And then to the right of the center, you'll see that there's a few other colored cubes. Those are your other instruments, and there's some fun stuff there to play with. So another great visualizer by Gabriel. It's, I believe, part of the Tech Zone. It also has one of our other instruments called the lava loops. So this was also, again, a very gray box kind of thing. It was just a cylinder with a cylinder on top of it. And, you don't really know what to do with something like that because, again, it's an interface and you don't want to change the way it works. So I just said, okay, well, why not make it a lava lamp or something like that? Because, as a kid, I remember having those in high school. And, they're kind of a part of the whole psychedelia. They can be totally related, and everybody recognizes these in some fashion. So yeah, I think it turned out pretty well. I liked what they did with it. And again, once you see what the interaction is with these things and the music and the sounds that they produce, it's pretty awesome. And then one of my most favorite is this synth orb right here. It's kind of like one of those plasma globes that you get when you were a kid where you touch it with your finger and the electricity sparks to it. That was like one of the initial things as we were playing with it. And it had a few iterations, but of course, it's like when you touch it, like you kind of didn't know what you were getting out of it. And once we turned it into this plasma type effect, it became very clear how you interact with it. It has all kinds of layers to it. It's a 3D interaction, so you can move inside, outside, up and down on it. It creates some very interesting noises. And then we have a harp that's kind of like, it's a very fun one to play with. Was also kind of a tough one for the designers to really believe in, but I think they kind of figured out how the interaction should work, because plucking something in VR is actually not that simple, but they solved that pretty nicely. And then, let's see. Here's one more visualizer. And then, okay, actually this is also cool. So these tracks on our right, we just recently incorporated voice work. So before it was all just instruments, right? And then getting actual voices into the game was a tough challenge. How do we get vocals to work? One of the most interesting and one of the last things that kind of got into the game was this vocal track system. And again, please do try it when you get in there. It's a ton of stuff to play with. And then lastly, it looks like we have our audio grenades. So these are things that are kind of like one-offs that you can throw into the air and just have fun with, and they explode and make a cool noise. And again, I would say when it comes to the visualizers, I can't speak for Gabe and his inspirations, but for sure this one you see right here is one of my favorite, and I don't know if you guys have ever played Outrun, but it's an old Sega arcade game. And essentially as you're playing and hitting the instruments, you're going to see these kind of waves fly by that are like cars on a track. And I think in general, a lot of the look of these visualizers were heavily inspired by the 80s and the synth wave, which I think is just a very cool thing to see come back. Yeah, the 80s had a big part in the overall visual direction of this game. Kind of gaudy, kind of outrageous, very colorful, very neon, but ultimately it really sells the idea of technology, the future, and then the type of music that we're all interested in, which is electronic music. And then that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for letting me come out. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I hope you guys get a chance to get on the show floor and play the game. How are we doing on time, by the way? Plenty? Okay. Questions? Yes. Like how much time did it take to create each one? It really ranged depending on from concept to execution. I think anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks. Luckily, a lot of the elements that make up those visualizers are relatively simple objects, but it's more about how do you tie all that together. And they're also very reactive to what you're doing. So they're not just these things that are looping behind you, but colors are shifting, scales of things are changing, the rate of these things are all being affected by your performance. Thanks. Gabe will love you for saying that. He worked very hard on these visualizers. And another guy, James Littlejohn, he's one of our VFX and tech artists. A lot of the effects that you see, all the instrumentation, every little detail that's not readily apparent is all done by him as well. And those guys work very closely together to help create that look. Hi.
So I had a quick question.
Sure.
For folks who naturally play instruments and stuff like that, they obviously have a leg up. But those who are new to it, what kind of visual language did you use to kind of cue them as to when would be a good time to hit a crescendo or stay on the beat? Or did you guys problematically just kind of push it to stay on beat?
I think at the end of the day, because of the music reality engine and what we're doing under the hood, no matter when they decide to hit that orb, it's going to sound right on beat.
Yeah, okay.
As somebody who is more musically inclined than others, you're going to have a much better time at performing, right? But for those that are they've never really picked up an instrument, they don't know how to dance or they don't know how to keep a beat, it's going to make you sound as good as it can, and it does pretty well. I mean, you can go pretty crazy on that stuff, and it just ends up sounding really great. But yeah, for those that are inclined and have some experience, it's going to only enhance that much more. I mean, what I show you in those images does not really explain the amount of depth that thing has. It's just absolutely amazing how much you can actually do. So you can queue up sequences. You can have all kinds of modulation going on. It becomes just an experience and then becomes more of like a production environment if you want it to be. So the layering is just absolutely crazy. I remember just when it first started, it was just the orbs, right? And it was just that alone was enough to keep me going for a long time. And I mean, anybody who gets in there winds up playing for 45 minutes to an hour straight, and you have to pull them out because they just won't leave it, which is pretty much speaks for itself and how awesome it can be. I think inherently everybody wants to be a performer. Everybody wants to be able to, be the cool guy who's playing and DJing at the club, and it really gives you that opportunity to do that. And we've got, awesome thing, we got to be at South by Southwest, and we were performing on stage there, and it was a great feeling to see that. I was really proud for the guys.
Awesome.
And another thing to keep in mind is a lot of the audio tracks that you hear in the game are not just musicians, but the engineers that made the game. So these guys are, they love music, they really believe in music. They take it very seriously, even though it's a very fun and wacky game, but they spend an insane amount of time building the technology, and all I did was come in and kind of try to help make sense of what they built and give it some visuals to it, right? I certainly didn't join the project as an art director. I'm just the lead artist who is there to help get things done and help move things forward. And since I did come in so late, it was kind of like, we just knew we had to enhance everything a bit more. Because, I always felt it could stand on its own, to be perfectly honest. I was just happy that I was allowed to come in and, add some extra speckle to it,
Cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, you mentioned that the engineering was the one that influenced the art direction.
Yeah.
Was there a point during the development that it was the other way around, like the art direction influenced how things would be made or the design of the game?
I would say absolutely no. When it comes to something like this, my job is just to enhance and help, right? I have no interest in letting my art dictate how you interact with things and just how you are supposed to experience everything. I just want to help drive what they've built and make it, something pretty to look at and something fun to look at. Again, if there was really nothing else but making the music, I still think it would just be amazing. So it's hard to say. Like the only major influence I had overall was just the this introduction sequence that many people have not gotten to see yet. So.
Right. Thanks.
So visually speaking, I noticed that you changed the design of that first area where the ships were to match the color scheme. How was this process of balancing, say, the visualizer's color schemes with the overall color scheme of the game? Because I feel like it can get pretty distracting if you have a bunch of yellows and oranges with a bunch of blues and purples in there.
Well, it's one of those things. If you go to these festivals or you go to these concerts, right? It's all about the distraction. It's just an eye festival. It's eye candy everywhere, and part of that is just the culture of it, right? It's again psychedelia. It's all about trying to overload your sensory, your sensors with whatever you can, be it the music and then the visuals.
But I do worry about if that inhibits the player from playing the game,
I certainly think if anything. The player is always just focused on what's in front of them.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's very rare that you're taking your eyes away from your instrument, right? Everything else around you is there for everybody else to observe and enjoy. It's not necessarily for you as a performer. So really, as people are playing their music, you want these really bombastic visuals going on in the background. You do want these strobing elements. It's just the nature of the electronic music scene.
Right, so they'll be able to stay focused.
Oh yeah. And even if you can't focus and you're just like, oh my God, I can't do this. You're smacking the orbs and everything sounds great and you're having a blast and people around you are having a good time.
All right.
Hello. Great talk.
Hi.
I'm curious about the iteration process. Is there a point where, as the music comes in, the visuals change, or vice versa? Is there how does the synergy work between that, and how does the iteration process between?
So the visuals themselves, like the visualizers, were completely dictated by Gabriel, and the audio itself is completely separated from that experience, right? The only thing I can say is the way that they tie these things together is just through the technology of what they built in their engine. And then how do we transition from one song to the next and one room to the next is also its own interesting experience. They've done an amazing job of being able to merge the worlds together and blend them together. You're not just loading in and then loading out and then loading in. You actually feel like you're traversing and kind of just ripping through space and ripping into these zones, and just the language of it all just was handled very nicely. It's one of those things that's so abstract you can't necessarily describe these things, right? It's like the game is a very, very, it's very out there. It's just like everything about it is just, you can't put, it's hard to put words to. I mean, if you saw half of those visualizers, how would you even begin to describe what you saw, really, right?
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome.
Amen. How much time was spent on the concepting stage?
Concepting, that for me is impossible to say. All I can say is when I joined, because again, I was finishing up raw data, and as soon as I finished it, I was moved on to this because it was like they needed somebody to help come and tie these things together and then just put polish down on it. And they had already done, I mean, I could show you all, even from the visualizers, I mean, I've dug through everything. An insane amount of conceptualization went in from the instrumentation to the visualizations. And then, of course, when we got to the ship itself, I mean, that was, I think, one of the toughest times. So quite a bit of iteration. I mean, for me to collect all that stuff to display would have been quite a bit. And I was already feeling, and I'm quite surprised how fast I kind of just talked through the whole thing. But there's just an insane amount of stuff that they did. So it's just, if at some point we'll probably have these things available online, it would be great for us to collect all of our art and just kind of share it with everybody, because you would be shocked how much has changed.
Was it mostly 2D painting type stuff, or like? Also
Yep. Well, it's a combination of the both, right? It's like start with all the geometric patterns and all these really hard surface shapes, and these very precise elements have to be, you know, it's best to do them in 3D and then add everything on top of it.
All right, thanks.
We good? Everybody cool? All right. Well, thank you very, very, very much.